Today we have a podcasting powerhouse with us, Richard. With over 25 years behind the mic, he's a TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and the CEO of Podcast Solutions Made Simple. Carl helps coaches, consultants, and content creators launch world-class podcasts that position them as go-to experts. If you're struggling to grow your podcast or thinking about starting one, this episode is packed with marketing hacks you can't afford to miss. Welcome, Carl.
Wisdom, thanks for having me. I'm very thrilled to be having this conversation with you today. Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, before we go into the core topic of the episode, I always like for my audience to know who they are listening to. And so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions just for the audience to get an insight into the man behind the mic.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. What first got you hooked on podcasting?
Oh my goodness. Wow. How far back do you want me to go? I spent 25 years in radio broadcasting, which was my first love. Actually, my first love was acting. We won't talk about my non-career as an actor.
Yeah.
We won't go there, Wisdom. But I spent 25 years as a radio broadcaster, working every format from rock to country to pop to oldies to what's referred to as music of your life. You know, music from Frank Sinatra, Patsy Cline, artists like that. All of that. And 25 years was, when I look back at it, I go, it was a really fun time. I enjoyed my career, but they say you haven't made it in radio until you've been fired at least once from a radio job. I was fired twice.
Wow.
So I guess that makes me a superstar.
Yeah. You broke the record.
I did. Well, not literally, but I did definitely.
Yeah.
There's probably some records were broken in the process, but anyway, so between radio jobs back in 2010, I started looking for something to do. I didn't think I'd get back into radio, which I eventually did. So somebody said you should be a speaker trainer. I'm good at speaking, good at giving evaluations and doing platform presentations. So I thought, you know what, I could do that. I eventually did get back into radio, and it was during that second go around in radio, still running a part-time business as a speaker trainer, that I was first led into podcasting. And at first I didn't know what a podcast was, and I eventually figured out that, hey, this is a great tool to be using for my speaker training business to position myself as an expert. So I launched a podcast in 2019, and I didn't look back.
Wow, 2019. Wow.
Yeah. Going on 6 years ago. It was almost 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago. It was January of 2019 is when I launched.
Yeah. You worked in radio, public speaking, as you said earlier on, you do speaker training and podcasting. So my question is, how do you're someone who is in a position to see how do these words overlap when it comes to engaging an audience?
Okay. You know what? It's essentially the same. The only difference is, I think, with radio, and certainly now with podcasting too, is you don't see your audience, right? Especially radio. You don't see your audience. It's like you and I right now on this audio podcast. You don't know who your audience is. So you have to have a good understanding as to who they are, who's your client avatar. And you want to be able to make sure that you're connecting using the right words, right? So you want to make sure that the language you're using, the words you're putting out there are connecting to the audience. And there's little tricks that I learned in broadcasting that allow you to do that. Even simple words like you. You know, you is a very simple word, but when you use the word you as opposed to, okay, listeners out there, if you say the word you, all of a sudden, Wisdom, you probably figured out if I said that I'm talking to you. If I said listeners, you don't identify with that. So that's how the worlds really collide, I think, is because when you're a platform speaker, you want to connect with your audience in the physical sense, not in the physical sense, but in the visual sense, and making sure that your message has impact and they're in front of you, they're seeing you moving and doing all of that. With podcasting, it's a little bit different. Radio, it's a little bit different, but it's the same thing. And so instead of it being theater or presentation on a stage, it's theater of the mind. So what can you say on a podcast that you would say on a stage, but you're going to say it slightly differently because you need to paint the picture a little bit, just like you would do in radio. So that's a big collision of those three worlds for sure.
Yeah. On like a stage, you get to see the audience and you see how they're responding to what you're saying.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You do. And even in television, there's especially live television, which we see less and less of these days. There is definitely a connection. When the audience can see you and you can see the audience, especially the audience seeing you. When you know the eyes are on you, you know that you have to be at the top of your game.
Yeah.
When the eyes aren't on you, it's a bit of a mental exercise to really make sure that you're focused. It's very easy to take your focus away when you don't see your audience because, and again, this is coming from a guy who spent 25 years in radio. If you're tired or you don't feel well, sometimes your energy is low. You gotta pick that energy up, paint a smile on your face, and just like you and I are doing today, carry on that conversation and make it exciting and make it vibrant. It's hard to do when you're not feeling well, and when you don't see the audience, it's easy to go, oh, they can't see me. They're not going to know. It'll be fine. But yeah, so it's definitely a great collision of the three worlds.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I like the fact that you're someone who has the what would I call it, the credibility to be able to speak of the three words because you've been in all three.
Yeah, it's and I'll tell you, it's been fun in each one of those three worlds. I've learned a lot in each one of those three worlds. There's subtle differences to each one. I mean, if you're learning to be a platform speaker, there are some tips and tricks. If you're learning to be a podcaster, especially if you're only using audio or audio and video too, there's tips and tricks. If you're learning to be a broadcaster, there's tips and tricks to keep the show moving forward. And it's the same here with this podcast, right? Like you want to keep it moving forward, even though that you're probably going to be doing some editing in the background, you still want to keep moving the content forward.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with on the platform too.
Yeah. Like I know that those of you that are listening, you get to understand now that he's someone who has walked the talk and he has a lot of experience behind his belt. Even though he seemed to have started his podcast in 2019, he's been talking for a very, very long time. And what just happened that he just switched the medium. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Actually, I'm going to give you a little tip right there. Something that you said, and this is not me correcting you, by the way, but you said those of you who are listening. Those of you is the same way is the same as saying, hey, audience out there. It's the same way of saying that. But if you said something like, if you're listening to this and you are connecting with what Carl and I are saying, all of a sudden you've personalized it. So there's a little tip for you and a little tip for your audience too that's listening.
Thank you so much for that.
They can now take with that.
Yeah, that's like a one-on-one masterclass right there.
There you go. And anytime you want me for a one-on-one masterclass, I'm your guy. I'm your person.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think let's dive into the meat of the matter, the main, which is the marketing or podcast marketing, right? Before I even start asking the question, one of the biggest struggle with podcasts is that unlike every other medium, it's built in a way that it's not built for discoverability in a way, because unlike YouTube where you could go viral, there's nothing like your podcast going viral or like social media or any of those stuff. Like for podcasts, you have to promote it out of the podcast itself. So even if you post consistently, it doesn't necessarily mean that people will find your stuff, except you talk about it and get other persons to know the podcast out there.
Absolutely. And as far as going viral on YouTube or being the next sensation, there's probably some statistics out there, but I would venture to say that most people aren't going viral on YouTube anymore.
Yeah.
You know, there's not too many YouTube sensations out there. Same as social media. Like it takes a lot. It's a slog, Wisdom. It's a grind to get that attention on social media, especially because of algorithms that you're fighting. And okay, you have less of a fight with algorithms on YouTube, but certainly in social media, you're playing the algorithm game all the time. And if you think you're going to become a superstar just because you're posting to YouTube or Instagram and even TikTok, I mean, TikTok, you maybe have a little bit more success in doing that. But I always go back to, what's the reason? What's the purpose behind you wanting to go viral or wanting you to do that? If it's just to do, and I'm speaking of TikTok here, if it's just to do some kind of funky chicken dance that everyone's going to laugh at and go, hee. Okay, well, is that your business? If that's your branding and your business, have at it. But for most people, they're engaging using a podcast because they want to elevate either their brand, their business, their credibility. They want to put their passion project out front. They want to promote something that they love, a hobby, an interest, or they have something that they're genuinely attached to. Some of the top formats in podcasting are true crime, sports, news, comedy. It still takes a lot of effort to do that, especially if you're coming from a place of being brand new to this space. So it's in itself, podcasting is its own marketing tool. And you're right, Wisdom, when you say that you don't become an overnight success by just starting a podcasting show. It doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. The thing now is, for someone who has just started a podcast, they're listening right now.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, let's talk about discoverability. What's the best way, right, for a new podcaster to get found in such a crowded space?
Honestly, and this might even sound a little bit facetious, but the honest and to goodness way to be seen or to be heard is to let people know you have a podcast. I know that sounds silly, but it would blow your mind, Wisdom, how many people that we've worked with or how many clients that we've talked to who struggle with actually opening their mouths and saying they have a podcast. It's almost like they spend, the 2-3 months working hard, getting that first 10 episodes ready, and then they launch the show and they say that, like, they don't even say it out loud. It's like they're whispering it. So that's the main thing, is not being afraid to say it. And I don't care what anybody else says. At the recording of this episode, it's 2025. The best way to let people know you have a podcast is to tell them. And the more you can verbally tell them, even if it's on social media, we'll use social media as an example, because that's a very easy way to say, yeah, I have a podcast. You can easily say it using all kinds of different tools, promotional tools, marketing tools. I don't know if we're going to get to that today or not, but you can simply by saying, hey, coming up on the podcast this week, you can say that. You can say that in a social post. That's what's going to make the difference between those who are promoting the show all the time and those who are not. If you're not promoting yourself, if you're not putting it out there, you're not going to have a chance. And I've seen that. I've seen people, as I said, launch a show and it's crickets. And it's crickets because they aren't promoting it. They're not, they're maybe burying it in their website somewhere, or it's in the, last page of a newsletter in small print that nobody knows it's there. So you need to be able to almost stand on a mountaintop and say, I have a podcast. That's how people will find it. That's the magic. That's the secret sauce.
Yeah, I like the fact that before you even started talking about the tactics and the techniques, you just give it in a very simple conceptual way that the best way for people to find your podcast is for you to tell them. And then you started talking about some of the means in which you can tell people about your podcast. I don't know if you know about SEO.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the question I want to ask is, how can we use that SEO kind of to boost our podcast?
SEO is very important. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that probably before you even get to SEO, you really need to make sure you're putting the best content out there. SEO is it's a complex thing, but it's also very simple. One of the easiest ways that I like to make sure SEO is properly addressed is during the titling of your episodes. What's the title of your episode? If it's season 1, episode 4, My Conversation with Wisdom, it's probably not going to hit SEO very well. So you need to have something that is engaging, that's very enlightening, that's really capturing the essence of your message. The other thing that people forget about SEO is what they're putting in their show notes. And a lot of people will say, well, people don't read show notes. You know why people don't read show notes, Wisdom? It's because we don't drive people to show notes enough. But if you're constantly saying, and by the way, my checklist for the top 10 things that are going to make you a better podcaster are in the show notes. If you want it, go there and get it. You know what people will do? They'll go there to get it.
Yeah.
See, it's like anything else. You need to drive the audience there. So that's that one. The other thing that some podcasters forget to do, and it's so easy, is having a transcript. If you have a transcript version of your show, you would be surprised how many people actually will read the transcript or will use the transcript even for their own research, or they'll be quoting your material from your podcast in their own articles and blogs. So having a transcript version of your show will also help with SEO immensely. The big one, I think, is titling, then making sure that your show notes hit SEO points as far as making sure you've got the right keywords. And we're at a point now now that you don't want to have too many keywords, because then the SEO, especially in Google, it'll throw up on itself. So you don't want that, but you want to make sure that they're in there. And then, as I said, the sweet spot is also making sure that you have a transcript version of your show.
Yeah. I feel like, SEO is more like if you had a book, right? And you wanted to organize in the library for other persons to find it easily. How would you organize it? You will not want to put your book on, let's say, podcasting, put it in the psychology section. That would be like, that would be spam, right? But if you put, let's say, the book of podcasting under maybe public speaking or maybe business, entrepreneurship, a whole lot of other categories, it will make sense, right? That's how SEO is. It's more like helping people to find your content easily by organizing and naming it well.
And 100%, I 100% agree. The other key to that is also making sure that, and a lot of podcast hosting sites will allow you to do this, is making sure that you're using the proper tags. So if you have the proper hashtags for that content, because that's the digital world that we're in, everything's a hashtag now, then it'll be easier for people to find it. So it's not just the keywords, it's what are the tags. I mean, we use Buzzsprout as our hosting site for our clients, and you can put tags right in the show, and in every episode, those tags are there. Making sure that you're using all those tools at your disposal so that you can make sure that you're having a very good experience getting in contact with the people who want to engage your content through using the right SEO processes and tools that are available to you.
Yeah. When you talked about a transcript and show notes, I think there was an assumption in which you were basing that advice on. The assumption is that someone already has a website. So the question I want to ask is, what are some of the marketing benefits of having a website for your podcast?
Actually, that's not the case. I mean, if you're using a proper hosting site, your podcast it might not have a website, but it'll have a landing page.
Yeah.
So I'm not a firm believer in having a separate website for your podcast, unless that's a separate leg of your business. If that's a separate leg of your business, or you run the type of show that requires you to have a separate website, like, again, some of the top formats are sports and true crime. And so for example, if you have a true crime podcast, and I actually know a couple of people who are engaging in that space, you might benefit from having a separate website. But honestly, the best way for you to be discovered, and especially if you're using your podcast for business, is to have your podcast on your website. So I'm a business owner. I have a website. It would be silly for me to have a separate website for my podcast, considering the fact that my hosting site, Buzzsprout, gives me a landing page with all of the plugins to attach it to my existing website. Why would I spend the money, firstly, to get the website, to get the domain? Why would I do that, then pay the hosting fee for it when I'm already doing that on my existing website? And really, if you're a business owner, you have already learned long time ago that you want people to go to your website. It's a tricky thing to do, but you want people to go there. So you should be driving people there all the time. But definitely utilizing your website and making sure that the user experience for your podcast on your website is top notch. So there are plugins, as I said, for the various hosting sites that are available to you. If you can do customized work for yourself, that's even better. But definitely have it there. And as I said, if you're the type of person that doesn't have a website, don't feel you have to go and build one, because like I said, most of your hosting platforms like Buzzsprout, Podbean, they all will come with a hosting, not a hosting site rather, but they will come with at least a landing page where you can have it all organized there. So you don't need to have a separate website.
Yeah. Before we talk about some of all the other marketing techniques and tactics, there's one thing a concept I've been thinking of lately, and I'd love for you to maybe expand on it, is the idea that for the podcasting has a process from idea to booking guests, depending if you are doing an interview show, if it's a solo show, to scripting and doing the research and all that, right? And then recording, editing, and then uploading, right? So the question I want to ask is, from start to finish, how could someone, before they even get to the promotion stage, how could someone integrate some little the techniques of marketing into the process, such that by just producing their podcast, they get to market the show without even having to go out of their way to say, okay, now it's time for marketing? I don't know if the question makes sense.
No, I think that's Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. What one of the things that some of my clients have done when we've been getting set to launch their podcasts is uh, they'll they'll actually do they'll do little marketing tips and tricks, I guess you could say, that the end game is them promoting their show without promoting their show, I guess is really a good way to put it, or promoting their show indirectly. So let me give you an example of that. We had a client that we launched 4 years ago, and one of the things she did was as soon as she got her microphone, so she's in the early stages of creating her podcast. She knows she's creating it though, but she's in the very early stages. She gets her microphone. It arrives at her front door. She's getting set to open it up. What does she do? Rather than just opening up and start recording her episodes, no, she flips on Facebook and does a Facebook Live. And you do a video through YouTube or whatever now, but she does a Facebook Live and says, "Hey, it's," and I'll just use a name. So
let's just say Julia.
So
Julia.
It's more identified.
Yeah, Julia.
Let's say it's Julia.
Yeah.
Julia's getting out there, and Julia says, "Hey, it's Julia. I'm so excited. I'm going to be launching a podcast in the next, 4 to 6 weeks. I'm working with a guy, Carl Richards. He's so awesome." There's a shameless promotion for me. Anyways, there's Julia saying, "And by the way, I got my microphone today. I'm so excited. I'm going to start recording my podcasting content, my episodes. You're going to want to listen to them, I'm sure, but I want to show you my microphone." And as she's doing this, she's unbundling it. She's opening it and saying, "Here's my microphone, and oh, there's a cable." And so it was really cool the way she did it. So that's one thing. The other thing that you can do is you can do some, as you're recording interviews with your guests, you can do screenshots. You and your guests take a photo and post it. Say, "Hey, it's me, Carl Richards, having a conversation with Wisdom, recording his episode that will go live in the next 6 weeks," whatever it is. So you can be doing all of these things organically. They don't cost you any money, and they're driving people to you. The other thing that you can be doing, and we're not just talking about from a launch perspective here, Wisdom, we're talking about as you're going.
Yeah, day to day.
You can be, for example, day to day, I do a lot of speaking and presenting, and I'm in networking groups, and I can be saying to people organically on a stage or on a physical stage or on a virtual stage, I can say, "And by the way, one of my recent guests on the podcast, we were talking about X, Y, and Z."
Yeah.
So you can consistently be promoting without promoting.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if you have a book, right? It's the same thing. If you've ever seen speakers on a stage and they have a book, and again, some of this is strategically positioned, but what's wrong with doing it for a podcast? But they'll say on the stage, they'll say, "In chapter 3 of my book on page 6, I actually talk about blah, blah, blah. I actually talk about X, Y, and Z."
Yeah.
So you can do the same thing, right? Anytime you're engaging in social media, anytime you're reaching out to your email list, you should be giving the opportunity. And again, you don't have to sell it and say, "Listen to my episode." You can be simply saying something like, "Recording some podcast content this week. So excited."
Yeah. I think,
you can do things like that.
I think the whole idea is to invoke curiosity, not to get, that's the idea, to get people to be curious about the thing.
Exactly. You don't need to sell people a spoon. They know when they need spoons.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what you need to do is, as you said, invoke that curiosity about what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
The spoon will sell itself, right?
Yeah.
If people are running out of spoons or they're time for new spoons, they'll run to the store, they'll buy spoons. Same thing with the podcast, but you need to be a little bit more intentional, but without being a salesperson about it. I think that's one of the challenges that especially new podcasters is that they get into this spot where, okay, Carl said I have to be promoting my podcast. I have to be talking about it all the time, but that's what they're doing is they're promoting their podcast and they're talking about it all the time like they're selling their podcast.
Mm.
And it's not about selling the podcast. It's not the subtle ways in which you say, "Yeah, I've got a podcast," or, "Hey, I'm recording content this week and, one of my guests is going to be Wisdom and here's a photo of us having our conversation," or unbundling the microphone when you get it, or something funky happens in the studio. I don't know. I've got construction going on behind my house that's been going on for quite a while now. You could do a recording of a forklift if that, you know what I mean? And just say, "Trying to record some podcast content, but this is all I hear is the forklift."
Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of a,
Yeah.
an extremely subtle way, but it also says, hey, don't forget when you're recording your podcast content, you want to make sure you're in a very quiet environment. So there's a lot of little nuances that'll just, and they're innocent and they're harmless, right?
And someone will say, well, he has a podcast. I wonder what his podcast is about. Let me go check.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like you don't actually have to say, and we're in this moment in time where, I'm just organizing my thoughts here. We're at this moment in time where you don't have to sell a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
I live in a country where we're massive coffee drinkers, and we have a brand here called Tim Hortons, and everyone loves Tim Hortons coffee. But you know what? Tim Hortons doesn't have to sell coffee. You know what they sell? Well, they sell coffee. But you know what they sell from a promotional standpoint? They sell the experience behind the coffee. And I'm not talking about the roasting of the beans or the pouring of the hot coffee in the cup. I'm talking about, where are you drinking that coffee? Are you drinking it on the job site? Are you drinking it at the arena where your grandson or granddaughter is playing ice hockey? Is that where you're recording it? Is that where you're drinking that cup of coffee? So they're not selling coffee, even though that's their product. They're selling family, they're selling relationships, they're selling all of those things that have come in contact, I guess you could say, or been in contact as a result of that cup of coffee.
Yeah, I think
makes sense.
it's about finding ways to tie stories to the abstract.
Absolutely. And the more, without being ridiculous, the more abstract you can be, the more abstract you can be, the better your chances of getting those curious listeners, especially if they're your P1s, if they're your key listeners, if they're your client avatars, to get them interested and engaged in what you're doing. That is where the sweet spot and the magic is.
Yeah. I know we've talked about social media promotion and all that, right? But one of the objections podcasters that are just starting out, they have is, well, I don't have a huge following, or I'm just starting on social media. Nobody really knows me. I have like 10 followers, right? Who will see my stuff? It's easy for you to say, you have thousands of followers, right? A lot of persons will follow you and they'll see your stuff. But me, I'm just starting from zero.
Oh, you mean imposter syndrome, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? I think everyone suffers from it at some point, imposter syndrome. And here's the thing. You don't need a massive audience. You do not need a massive audience. Let me give you a good example of this. I have a colleague who is a very high-profile coach in the United States, and he uses LinkedIn. LinkedIn is his platform. He uses it all the time. He has limited the number of connections he has on LinkedIn. I think he's limited it to, it's either 500 or 1,000, but he's limited it to that number. You know why he's limited it to that number? Because he only wants to be connected with the people who are his clients or the people that he wants to do joint venture partnerships with or have some type of a professional relationship with. Yeah. So he limits the number of connections versus the person that has 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people on Facebook and LinkedIn and how many thousands of people on YouTube. And see, because again, you want your audience to be your audience. You want it to be an audience that you want to be in front of.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I'm not going to be the most successful speaker talking about podcasting on a stage if none of my ideal clients are there.
Yeah.
Right? So I want to make sure that if I'm getting on a physical stage, that I'm talking to the right audience. Well, it's the same thing, right? You want to make sure that your core audience are the people that you want to be in front of. So that means you don't have to have a deep network. I mean, a deep network helps. If you have, I have 5,000 people almost now on Facebook. I've got about 3,500 on LinkedIn. How many of them are engaging in my content, though? It might only be a small fraction of that. But if you have a small fraction of an audience, 50, 100 people, but they are your core audience, they're your core clients, I mean, good on you.
Yeah.
That means you've done the right thing in getting in front of your ideal audience. You don't need to have a massive following to be massively successful at podcasting. As a matter of fact, if you do have a small following, it's probably easier to get in front of your ideal audience, and you can build it. You can build it as you go.
Yeah.
We've worked with clients on that where we help them build their following as they're building out their podcast. Because one of the things that we haven't talked about is that with podcasting, this is the neat thing when this happens. And Wisdom, I don't know if it's happened for you yet. I'm assuming it has. But one of the things that happens is when you have listeners engaging you, listening to your content from countries that you've never even been in or you've never even heard of.
Yeah.
right? I have listeners in Asian countries. I don't know anybody in Asian countries. I know nobody that lives in Asian countries. I'd have to really go through my list of people to figure out who is it in Asia, who is it in Asia that I know? And honestly, I don't know anybody. Anyone who I know is of some type of Asian nationality is living in either the Americas or they're living in Europe somewhere. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's the magic, is you grow your audience as you go.
Yeah.
You grow as you go.
Yeah, that's right. I think I just from a recent podcast episode I just did, I was speaking with a guest. I think his name is Druby. We talked about how it's not about getting so many eyeballs. It's about getting the right eyeballs to see your content.
Yes.
Yes,
100%.
There's an example that who would you rather have? Would you rather have someone like Elon Musk to be listening to your podcast, or would you rather or have 1,000 different persons that it's more about having, even if it's 10, 20, it's about, okay, these are the kind of persons that I want to be listening to my podcast.
That's I think the key message right there is, and I've had this discussion with people, when folks start talking to us about monetization and they say, well, I need thousands and thousands of listeners, and I say, wait a minute, which would you rather have? 10,000 subscribers to your show and maybe 100 of them listen? Or would you rather have 100 listeners who are engaging every episode?
Yeah.
Where there's 100% engagement every single time you're putting out content. But a lot of people, because we've been trained that big numbers mean big results and big success. Where does that come from? That comes from, I'll say it comes from the past, but it does come from the radio world or the television world or the print world, where it's the number of people who are getting the newspaper. It's the number of listeners on the radio who are listening to the radio program. It's the number of viewers to a particular television program that decides that allows advertisers to make a decision.
Yeah.
Should I advertise on this station? Should I put my ad in this newspaper? In podcasting, it's different. You can be extremely successful and have 40 listeners consistently every episode. As a matter of fact, I have a client, she's actually my coach. We launched her podcast and she would consistently get about between 40 and 60 listeners to every episode.
Oh.
And her whole thing was, and this is one of the things we educated her on, her whole thing was, does she get a client from her podcast every year? Does she get 1 or 2 clients from her podcast every year? And the answer is yes. And a client to her is worth about $30,000
My God.
US.
Wow.
So is it worth? So therefore, you don't need big but it goes to the point that you don't need big numbers to have big results.
We're not even talking about the lifetime value, because now that it's someone that actually knows and likes and trusts that they tend to stay for a longer time without doing business.
100%. And it also speaks to one of the things that we strategize with clients all the time is, and it's one of the things that I talk about too when I'm giving workshops and boot camps. I'll ask the question, how long should a podcast episode be? And I get answers from 15 minutes to 5 minutes to 20 minutes to an hour to, the honest to goodness truth is a podcast episode needs to be as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
But the bigger question is, or the bigger answer is, not how long should a podcast episode be, how long will your audience engage in that content?
Yeah.
So if you are the person that says, okay, well, I want my podcast to be an hour and I know my listeners will listen for an hour, great. Perfect. But if you know that 5 minutes is all you have and all your listener will listen for or your viewer will watch, we're pressed for time. Right? We're very pressed for time in this very busy world that we live in. If you're asking your listener or your viewer to sit there for a full hour and you're not giving them value, you're wasting their time.
Yeah.
But if you're giving them value, whether it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, that's the thing. So it's as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
Right? But it goes back to the success of the show too.
Yeah. I think recently I did an episode with Druby, and he talked about why most people think that when you listening to content that's because it's free. No, we're actually paying with something which is more valuable, which is our time. So as much as you're making content, you should understand that the user or the listener is paying, and they are paying with their time. And you don't want to waste people's time because they can't get that back.
Yeah, 100%. Time is money.
Yeah.
In any way you look at it, time is money. And yeah, okay, if I have the time, great. And I'm not always on the clock, and neither are you. Wisdom, I hope you're not always on the clock working. I hope you actually are resting at some point. But again, if you're driveling on, which is why I find some of these long form podcasts, and again, they're not designed for me. I'm a very give me the shortest version, because I want to listen to maybe 2 episodes or 3, as opposed to something that's 2 hours or 3 hours. Like, you give it to me in chunks. That's me.
Yeah.
But again, it goes to, like you already said, it goes to, am I making the best use of my listeners' time?
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're saying, okay, yeah, I'm really engaged with Wisdom and Carl, great, then thank you for being here. And if we're getting a little long in the tooth, you know what? It's okay too, because hopefully you'll come back. But the point is that I'm saying is, it's really about making sure that you're not wasting the time and that you're consistently providing value. Really, that's what it boils down to, is, are you providing value every single time you open the microphone?
Yeah. I think having a listener, having someone listen to your podcast is a privilege, because there are over 1,000 podcasts they could have been listening to, but they chose yours, and you want to prove them right, not wrong,
all the time.
Yeah. You've helped experts become go-to voices in their niche. And so the question I want to ask is, what are some of the strategies that work for turning a podcast into a brand building machine, or sales building machine?
Into a brand beauty machine?
Or sales building machine, whatever the case might be.
A sales machine?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's a good one. And again, I think this goes back to the value. Before we even start working with clients, we'll ask them a series of questions, and we'll say, what's your podcast going to be about, and what's the goal? Because that's ultimately what we want to know. We want to know what's the goal of the show. And because that's where the sales are going to come from, right? The sales aren't going to come from you having a show. A lot of people think that. They'll say, well, I have a podcast. I'm hoping it's going to make me money now. A podcast, unless you're Joe Rogan, you're really famous, it's not going to make you money, right? Oprah Winfrey can hiccup in the middle of the night and her podcast will make her money, right? But not Wisdom, not Carl. It doesn't happen that way. I wish it did. But unfortunately, it does not happen that way. So what you need is to strategically position your content, so people, not only will they come back every episode, every week, or however often you drop your episodes, but that they will be engaged, and you're giving them a reason to keep listening.
Yeah.
That's number 1. Number 2 is, are you selling or promoting your products and services on your podcast? A lot of people don't. A lot of people have podcasts. They think they're fun and they're kind of a cool thing to do, and they're business owners, but they're not actually promoting their services on their podcast. Well, to me, one of the things I do in every episode is I promote what it is I do. It's not at the beginning. Is it at the beginning? I know it's at the end. It's definitely at the end. And it's definitely throughout the conversations that I have with my guests that I'm explaining my viewpoint, my position. So I'm positioning my content, even with a guest, to have the listener contact me. That's what I want the listener to do, is to connect with me. Aside from that, though, if you have a program that you're running, or if you have a community that you're building, you should be promoting that. And that's the magic, too, is when you get to the point where you are taking your podcast, and that is building not just an audience that listens and watches your content, but they're going beyond the show. Yeah. What I like to call having green room conversations, where they want to know what's going on behind the scenes. So, for example, let's just use this episode as an example, Wisdom. If you said at the end of this episode, by the way, if you liked my conversation with Carl Richards, we're going to continue the conversation in the green room, and I've got 3 more questions I want to ask Carl, including this one. You're giving the listener a reason to follow you to the next thing. And by the way, you can promote that and sell that as bonus content if you want. That's one there. The other thing too is, if you're building community is where that allows you to market and promote your services on a deeper level. You can do it on the podcast, but if you have a community that you're meeting with on LinkedIn, or you're meeting them in a Facebook group, or even on a Zoom call once a week or once a quarter or whatever it is, and you're engaging them, guess what? That's a captive audience that you can promote your products and services to. All the time. And again, it's not about selling. It's always about, I always say it's about service. How can you be of service to your audience, not only for the podcast, but beyond the show, with valuable tools and resources, meetups, as I said, the green room conversations, those bonus pieces that might just be what those listeners need that week to hear.
Yeah.
So there's that. And guess what? The more you can do it, it develops a deeper know, like, and trust factor. And those are the people who will become clients.
Yeah.
Those are those 1 or 2 or 3 clients, like I mentioned with my coach, that if she's landing 2 clients a year from having a podcast and the other things that she does as a result of having a podcast, and that brings in $60,000 a year to her, is it worth it? Absolutely. And by the way, those were small numbers and that's a small community. But if you're reaching out and you're consistently building that show, you can consistently build and continue to build a bigger, I don't want to say an empire, but you can build a bigger community.
Yeah.
Where you now are holding, maybe you're not holding just meetups, maybe you're holding even conferences or retreats, things like that are so it's very big picture thinking, but it starts with having the right content positioned so that you can get to that point where you're giving the biggest value and you're getting the biggest return.
Yeah. So my take from what you've said so far is the fact that we have to go to the drawing board and ask yourself, what am I seeking to achieve with this content I'm creating, right? And then we'll then ask ourselves, how can I provide additional value? And then for every form of additional value, we can get to make money. So instead of thinking, how can I make more money? We should ask ourselves, how can I help the audience even more than what I'm already doing?
Yeah, that's a very good way to sum up what I just said.
Yeah.
Because your audience will, there's the old saying, if you build it, they will come, but you have to build it. But just because you've built it, you need to give people a reason to go there.
Yeah.
And you have to tell the listeners what you want them to do with that information.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that sometimes we fall short as podcasters, is we forget that audiences are, I used to say audiences are stupid. Audiences are not stupid. They're just really busy. They have a lot of things going on. And if you don't give them all of the instructions, then they might miss something. It's kind of like if you're making a cake, but you forget that, oh my goodness, to make a cake, you need eggs and flour.
Yeah.
And those are the 2 key things you need to make a cake.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a very good cake. But making the cake for a podcast is telling the listeners what you want them to do next.
Yeah.
So it's, hey, thanks for being, if this episode has engaged you or you're fired up today, go to the show notes because there's some more valuable resources there, including my 10-step process or my checklist or my this or my that. That's where that becomes a huge piece that, again, as I said, a lot of podcasters forget that.
Yeah. So true. But at the end of the day, if the focus of the podcast is not clear, you're not even going to know where to take them to because you don't even know where you want them to go to.
Oh, exactly. The clarity starts with knowing exactly what's the purpose of the show. Yeah. And it's not what's your it's not even what's the title of the show. That's a very small piece. It's what's the show going to be about? What's the purpose? What's the end goal? And what do you want to get out of this?
Yeah. Why are you doing it?
I would hope that if you're using your podcast for business, that you want to grow your business. Yeah. That would be my take. But but knowing the purpose and knowing what the why is huge.
Yeah, we talked about growing an audience, right? It's one thing, but the thing that nobody seems to talk about is keeping them, right? What's the key?
Yeah.
To making listeners come back episode after episode?
Don't get them angry. Don't give actually we've already covered part of it. Don't give them a reason to not listen to you.
Yeah.
And there are some reasons why listeners will tune out your show. Number 1 is quality. So I know that if you're listening to this, you have no idea how Wisdom is recording his episodes, but let me just share this with you. He's using a platform called Riverside, which is going to give him a very high quality output product that he can then do whatever he does with it in the background to make sure that by the time it goes to you, the listener, it's really high quality. That's number 1. He makes sure, and as do I, that my guests have the right recording equipment. I've got a microphone in front of me. Wisdom, I can tell you do as well. Mm-hmm. So what is the quality of the content you're putting out there? Not only the audio and the visual quality, but what is the content? What is your content? If it's just, and there are podcast episodes out there that are like this, but if it's just conversations that are going nowhere, or if it's a lot of glad handing with your guest and you're not really engaging the listener, guess what? They're going to tune out. So if you're engaging your audience, you're giving them a reason to keep listening, the quality is good, they'll come back. And they might even tell their friends and bring their friends with them. But that's the answer.
Yeah.
It goes down to the quality of the content and the quality of the audio and the video that you're putting out there. In this case, the quality of the audio, which is why I shared that it's a high-end product software that Wisdom is using to record, because he knows if he doesn't, that it's not going to sound very good. So Wisdom, good on you for using a good platform.
You just ended up revealing my secret.
Well, it's okay to know some of the secrets.
Okay. I want to nudge on what you the answer you gave, and I want you to ask that you go a little bit deeper on it. It's one of the problems we all face is that everybody tells us you have to create quality content. You have to create quality content, but nobody really knows what quality means exactly. And I'm not talking about the audio or the visual part. I'm not talking about the technical part. I'm talking about the actual content itself. So do you have like a framework or like a system or a guide someone can use, more like a checklist to say, okay, my content is quality or it's good enough?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And it's a longer answer than just giving it or explaining it here, but I have a multi-step process that I walk through. And if I have a guest, it's a little bit different, right? But firstly, I want to make sure that when I say quality content, I want to make sure that, for example, is the guest appropriate for the type of show?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I've had people reach out to me and say, I'd love to be on your show. I'm a Red Seal chef. Well, I don't want a Red Seal chef on my show unless they're going to be talking about communication strategies or what they're like if they have a podcast. It's not about me having just somebody on my podcast to say, hey, I've got somebody on my podcast. So what's the quality of the guest that I'm putting out there? If I'm doing a solo episode, I want to make sure that I am creating content that is engaging, that's making the listener think, that's posing questions in the listener's mind. I want to make sure that I'm solving a listener's problem. I want to make sure that if I have additional resources for listeners to help them with whatever that problem is, that I can provide that information in that episode. That's quality content.
Wow.
That's what I mean by quality content. And there is a framework and there is a structure that I do follow. I like to think in terms of 3. So it's kind of something that I learned when I was focusing a lot on professional speaking. And that's, the 3 things that we're going to cover during this talk. So, and again, not everything has to be formulaic like that. It doesn't have to be that strictly or rigidly structured. But if you focus on 3 things in every episode, and, we'll take, for example, this episode, marketing for your podcast. You know what? There's so many different ways to market a podcast. Oh my goodness. The challenge is a lot of people don't. Well, I want to provide you today in this episode 3 key things that will allow you to more efficiently and successfully market your podcast. Is everybody okay with that today? See what I just did, by the way? I just posed a question.
Yeah.
Even though we don't know, I don't know it. I'm not getting an answer from the listener, but I'm posing that question. Yeah. So things like that, that's how you're going to have an impact with what I like to refer to as content that's well positioned.
Yeah, I'd definitely love to follow up on that, and maybe in the future have you come back as a guest, and then we'll go deeper into the content framework for quality content, because the time flies so fast when you're having a conversation, a really, really good conversation. Yeah. Thank you so much. I definitely learned a lot, and I trust that you on the other side that's listening, you learned a lot. So the question I want to ask is, where can listeners connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, the best way to reach out to me is, and by the way, I'm on all the social channels, but the best way to connect with me is to go to my website. You'll see some of the work that we've done. You'll see the podcasts that we've helped launch. You'll see our podcast as well. And it's podcastsolutionsmadesimple.com. And hey, if podcasting's in your future, let us know about it. Let us know what your ideas are for podcasting. We'd love to hear about them. And I'd love to hear what you think about the conversation that I just had with Wisdom. And Wisdom, thank you so much for allowing me to come on your show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for accepting my invitation. And I'm glad that you're able to make our time, and I'm glad we're able to have this conversation. Honestly, I learned a lot, and I also know that, yeah, thank you so much. That's it for today's episode of Wisdom Journey. If you found this insightful, helpful, and you learned a lot from this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on your respective podcast listening platform. It really helps other persons discover the show. Yeah, keep creating, keep learning, and most importantly, keep sharing your journey. You never know who needs your wisdom today. You see what I did there? Until next time, stay inspired and keep going.